Hi, and welcome back to the Gender Reveal Party. I'm Jay Pryor, your host. This week, we are talking to April Patillo. April is another friend of mine. Once again, I want to thank April for her generosity and all of my friends for their generosity coming on the show and sharing with you the real reveal, revealing gender in ways that are powerful and amazing. And, I was thinking about this today. Gender is like poetry or art. I had a woman approach me who's been listening to the podcast and said, "Could you give a definition for femme?" And my immediate response was, "No, I cannot, nor would I ever try." The thing about gender is that you can't just stamp one label on it and say that's what it is. There's not some stamp definition. Those of you who are cisgender, heterosexual people who have lived nothing but the binary may have trouble getting your head around that. And I get that. Sometimes I look at a piece of art and I think, what in the actual heck did anybody think painting that? Now, somebody could come up right behind me and say, "Wow, what a beautiful rose garden." They see a rose garden. I see, I don't know what that is, but it's art. Gender is like that. You cannot tell another person what their gender is. You can't tell another person what their gender expression is. Everybody's is different, and that's the beauty of it. And so, one of my big hopes in doing this work is to help you realize that gender is fluid and it runs the gamut. And that means that you have the freedom to express yourself and your gender any way you want to. So today we're meeting with my friend April Patillo, who is also a sociologist. And April's one of my smart friends. I have lots of friends and I have lots of smart friends, and April's one of my smartest. I really love to surround myself with really smart people. And April is somebody that, I think I say this in the interview. I can't remember. It's been a minute. But anytime that we're talking or having a conversation, April can always bring in the theory. Let me tell you about the queer theory. So I love that about her, and and that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring her to you, is that I feel like you're going to learn a lot today. This is a little bit of a long interview, so if you want to, do it in parts, I understand that. But I really am delighted to introduce you to my friend April Patillo. Welcome to the Gender Reveal Party. I'm here with my friend April Patillo. Who's gonna fuck it up? And welcome, my friend, to the Gender Reveal Party. It's so nice to see you.
Same here, and I am so glad to be invited to the party. Looking forward
Thank
to the
you.
cake.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a joy. The best thing about this project that I'm doing isn't doing it just because I want to. It's just for fun. And I'm getting to talk to all my friends because so far I don't have to go outside of my friend list to have all this amazing depth and fun conversation about gender. So thank you for joining us. Here we reveal gender. We're the real reveal, right? Instead of the genital reveal, no baby sex parts here. Hey, it's fucked up. Can't help myself. No
No.
baby sex parts here. So, what is your gender identity?
So
Hello.
I I identify my gender as female.
Mhm.
I recognize and often talk about myself as cisgender.
Mhm.
Um, and oftentimes when I'm talking about gender, I also end up talking about sexuality. And we'll
Mhm.
talk about that more when we think about what I do in the world.
Mhm.
Um, but I identify my sexuality as queerly straight
Queerly straight.
and queerly straight. And
Yeah,
part
my
of that
audience is gonna
is
love that. Like, another word. I don't understand.
what's going on?
I know we're freaking them out completely. I'm pretty sure at this point. Queerly
Well,
straight. Yes, define, please.
so what I mean by queerly straight is that um, when oftentimes, and see, I'm an academic, when oftentimes we still think about gender as binary, as only having two options, and two options that look a very specific way.
Mhm.
And many of us don't identify with that as a sociologist, I recognize that change happens over time and it can take a long time. So my little independent niche is recognizing that I have an attraction for masculinity, towards masculinity. And I recognize that masculinity takes place in multiple kinds of bodies
Hmm.
and it shows up in multiple ways.
Nice.
So, recognizing that and knowing that I identify as female, as a woman, and as a cisgender woman, there are ways that my attraction to masculinity plays out in these queer forms.
Yeah.
But it's still very much, in my opinion, straight in that way.
Hmm.
It probably doesn't hurt
It's
that.
binary, I guess, right? At least from your perspective, because and when I met you, you identified as a femme, right?
Mhm,
And I would have
mhm,
called you a high femme then, for
mhm.
sure.
And that's probably most accurate. I'm still
Right.
high femme in that way.
Right. Right.
Um, but I have since evolved my way of thinking and talking about it
Yeah.
because femmes are sometimes attracted to femmes and sometimes have they either only sex with femmes and they flirt with other people, or they only have loving kinds of relationships with femmes and might sex with other kinds of people.
Hmm.
So I felt like that is probably the most accurate way to talk about myself. And I also recognize that, again, sociologists, gender is not a static thing. Even the idea of female as chromosomal identity is not static. There are all kinds of biologists that are ready to like jump the gun and argue with me about that. And I'm not a biologist,
Right.
but and woman as a category has so many realms to it. Even femme as a category has so many realms to it. So I recognize that fluidity. Um, there are times in my life where I've identified as just straight. There are times in my life where I identified as lesbian. There are times in my life where I identified as questioning, um, and not about gender, but about sexuality.
Yeah.
Um, and right now, and for the past several years, I've landed on queerly straight, and that seems to work.
Nice. I love it. And I love that thank you for sharing all that.
Mhm.
I wish that other people could understand the nuance. You know what? I want to stop for a second and let people know that I had a bicycle accident, right? And that I'm fine, right? But I know I look all jacked up, right? I'm a
Oh,
mess, right? But I'm good. So I just want to let people are like, what is going on with that?
you
They
are
have
still your
this
gorgeous
crap all
self.
over their hands and stuff. Yes. So I'm okay. But I wish that people could understand the nuances that even for me going, I mean, April, I am back. I feel more like a lesbian than I ever felt in my life right now.
Hmm.
I am
Okay.
so like, it feels so good to me. I feel like the
Mhm.
lesbian I was in my 20s, but I
Okay.
never identified with the word lesbian. I identified with dyke, which I still
Mhm.
identify with as dyke. But
Okay.
the young people call dyke a D slur. Like they don't let you say dyke.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
bad word for them. They was raised by those white liberals, and so they're all like, "Don't say dyke." But but dyke for me was my word. I always felt like a butch dyke, and
Mhm.
now I'm like, I don't know, going off testosterone. I mean, there's things I'm not willing to I say. I'm blushing. You know, how is it I can't have one conversation with you, even on Zoom, without blushing?
I don't know what you're talking about. I
Damn.
don't know what you're talking.
Anyway, I'm feeling very lesbianic, and I wish that people could understand those kind of nuances. I've
Yeah.
always identified when I've spoken.
Hmm.
I've always said that for myself, I felt like there's a distinction between relationship orientation and
Hmm.
sexual orientation. Because when you say sexual orientation, for me, it's like, who are you oriented to have sex with? And
Hmm.
again, I could sex with anybody. Like it
Hmm.
doesn't, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
But I don't like when I've had sex with men or whatever, it's like, just get
Hmm.
off me. I don't want to. talk to
I'm
you.
done now.
Like, I'm done with
Go
that.
away.
Right. Go away. But the
Yeah.
women I want to relate to and talk to and
Mhm.
cuddle and play, so I felt like
Yeah.
I've had a relationship orientation versus sexual
Mhm.
orientation. But
I-
queerly straight is brilliant. I love you.
Well, thank you. I
Hmm.
mean, I think too, a lot of times for a long while, I think right now we're in a cultural moment where that's shifting just a wee bit again. But this idea of being open and okay, talking about sexing as something different, as a different kind of intimacy than relationship intimacy. I
Yes.
think we're starting to have a little bit more conversation about that.
Right.
And of course, people in polyamory community and non-monogamous community have had these conversations, but that's not always been something that was talked about as openly.
Right.
And I think there's things like, oh, what is that show? Um, the show about polyamory in Mormon community, Sister Wives.
Sister wives.
So I think after Sister Wives, people talk about it, and that's very, my understanding is that it's very religion, cultural, community based. And that has some other things connected to it. But all of polyamory and all of poly community is not focused on that particular religious, cultural exploration of it.
Right.
But that frames a lot of our conversation now.
Right.
Um, and there are people who are like, I don't identify with this religious community. I don't, it has nothing to do with my religious beliefs. It's about how I understand my social needs, my intimacy needs, and how I relate to and with other people in intimate spaces.
Right.
And
Okay.
we
Before
don't
we go
feel
further, hold
comfortable
up.
talking about that.
I want you to introduce yourself to people,
Oh,
so
yes,
we know
I forget.
they know who's talking to you. So just um, so
Sorry.
my friend April is a sociologist,
Yes.
and you teach, and you want to tell them who you are and what you do.
Yeah. I am currently an assistant professor of public sociology at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona. And what do I say about myself? Oh my gosh. I am a sociologist by training. Um, and I often say also a sociologist by birth. My parents tell me that I used to talk a lot and ask a whole lot of questions. And that's what we do as sociologists. We ask a lot of questions. So I do that. I've also been an activist. I think of myself as an academic activist. I used to do a lot of things on the streets, a lot of protesting. And at some point, I realized I know why I'm out here protesting, but other people don't. And then I realized as I got older, some of the people I was protesting with didn't always understand all the detail and all the connections between things. And after a while, I said, maybe my job isn't to be like Jane Fonda on the street. God bless her, she's amazing. But I'm not yet 80, and I don't want to be arrested at 80 potentially. But I do want to do my part to make sure anybody who's protesting for any of the causes that I personally believe in has all the information to have whatever level of conversation they need to have to explain why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah,
So,
love it. Love it. And I was just teasing you about that earlier. Like, one of my favorite things about you is that no matter what conversation is going on, I can always count on you to bring the queer feminist theory and the
it's
academic
true.
references. And I appreciate that about you because, I don't know it, right? And I love to learn, and I love to learn from people like you who know all the things. And so we've been friends for a long time. We met in DC, and I don't even know how we met. I think maybe through Griffey. I mean, I think initially I
Yeah,
met you through Jessica
that's
first.
probably true.
Yeah.
Jessica and I and a number of other people were part of essentially what was like a young 20s, yeah, 20s to early 30s femme posse.
Hmm. Yeah.
that terrorized DuPont Circle
I mean,
and
I'm
Little
blushing
DuPont.
just thinking about it. Can't even. Whew,
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
remember.
Just a whole
Oh,
gaggle of femmes just
so
taking over
beautiful.
stuff.
Jiminy Christmas. It was just fierce. Fierce, fierce, fierce.
It
Yes.
was
I think,
fun.
yes. Yeah. And then I got to know you more when you were hanging out with Griffey. So I think that's,
Mhm.
and then we met. And you were somebody who I like. So, we were both Gemini. As soon as we met, we are like, hello.
I
Hi.
see all 4 to 6 of you.
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm so blessed to have you in my life. And one of the things I thought about with the gender reveal party is your lens, right? So
Mm,
I tell people, and I made this up, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I tell people that all the new letters get added to the alphabet
mhm,
because of academia, right?
mm,
I think it starts on a college campus somewhere, right? Somebody, if you remember back in the
mhm,
day, when during that time when there was a bunch of 2030 somethings and we were hanging out,
mhm,
we tried to make all kinds of new pronouns. We tried to get Z going, right? I mean, we
mhm.
tried to get, we tried on things and it
Yeah.
just, nothing ever seemed to, everything just kept going with the way of the binary. Um, so when they them pronouns came out, I was an elder gay by this time, elder tranpaw, and
Mhm.
I'm first, and for me, and I resist everything that I'm going to end up doing. So I tell my clients this on all people, never say never. It's going to happen to you. Like if you say never, you're going to do it. Just forget about it.
Just
If it
no.
comes out of your mouth, you say never, just know it's coming. It's
Mhm.
coming. Right. And so, when I first heard they, them pronouns, I'm like, oh, for crying out loud. The whole codgerness of it. And then I
Mhm.
remember speaking one day and I stepped up, and because I had always identified as a genderqueer,
Mhm.
but nobody else had that language, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody but the queer community. So I've always been, one foot in woman.
Mhm.
And then I was speaking one day, and I was saying the words, "I don't fit in this box. I don't fit in that box." And then I stepped off the stage, and I was like, "Fuck! I gotta start. I gotta come out all over again." Jesus, it
Mhm.
just never fucking ends. And it's like, well, so where does that language come from? I assert it comes from academia. I wanted to hear your take on that whole perspective. And I know you're teaching a gender sociology class, so I
Mhm.
wanted to just have you come and say all the things.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this. Do think I think there's some truth in there, but it's not the whole truth. I think that college campuses are one place that a lot of the thinking and the arguing about it and the going back and forth about what it means, it definitely happens on college campuses. And part of that has to do with the fact that a college campus is a place where people spend a lot of money, frankly, a little too much, in my opinion, because that's a whole other conversation about the
Right.
economics of higher education, side eye. Um, but people get to spend a lot of time thinking and writing and talking and creating together. So you get that interplay bouncing off of each other with these ideas. I'm not comfortable saying that it only happens on college campuses because there is money involved, and it can be the structure of higher education is so elitist in many ways. And I'm saying this as someone who has been working class, still has working class roots, who is now part of the academy. So I brought that sensibility with me and can recognize that, oh, this is the system I'm in. I also think there are lots of activist circles with really freaking smart people who, for whatever reason, because of cost, time, interest, they don't do the academy. They're not writing books on this, but they are talking to people, and they're talking to a lot of people. I think some of the language comes from that place as well. And I think that there's a place, a marriage, if you will, where sometimes academics and scholars get involved in these movements and these situations where they're in touch with people who aren't involved in the academy. And if they are fair in doing things right, they get a lot of information that can then feed those conversations. So I do think community, and in particular communities where there's activists, um, are often places where some of this language happens. And I also want to caution, I was just telling my class this, we often like to think that urban centers and cities are the only places where these conversations happen. That is a social phenomenon in terms of thinking about safety, right? A lot of LGBTQ, two spirit people, queer people generally, genderqueer people, um, it's historically have moved to more urban places frequently because of one, the ability to sort of blend in and not be obvious and everyone doesn't know your history. Also, two, because the idea is you get to see more people like yourself. But there's also movement, activity, queerness, broadly speaking, um, and gender expansiveness that exists in places outside of the city, places that we would categorize as rural.
Oh, for sure.
And
I mean, I
and
just did an interview with my friend Tori, who's going to be on. She's a chiropractor in Goodland, Kansas,
mhm,
and made her and stayed there and has transitioned there, and like she's a hero out there,
yeah,
staying there. You know.
yeah, and it's kind of like the brain drain that you hear about in developing countries or countries where there's some kind of conflict, that oftentimes people will go outside, cross those borders to get an education, maybe get work, sometimes send money back, sometimes go back. I think the same happens, generally speaking, with queer community. But there are ways that there are people in your nearest small town who are fighting the good fight,
Oh yeah,
letting
tons of
people
them.
know.
Oh yeah, tons of them. I've never. I mean, I got out of my small town, and then I left Lawrence even to go to DC and transition.
Mhm.
Because I'm no, no. And the only place I can live in Kansas is Lawrence, Kansas. That's like,
Mhm.
no.
But there are people who are part of their community, and because of their
Oh, for
role
sure.
or because of the connection that they've had, or just because of who they are, it works better for them in rural communities. And that's okay. I want to validate that.
Sure.
And there's thinking that happens there too,
Hmm.
informed by different realities, right? But it's all good because it all stretches our rubber band, as I like to say,
Hmm.
around how we embrace this thing called gender, this thing called sexuality, and
Right.
figuring out how we fit our part in that.
Yeah.
So,
You've been teaching how many years
oh
now?
boy. Officially, I've been teaching since 2015.
Okay.
And before that, I was kind of unofficially teaching in an academic setting as a graduate student who also taught for about 5 years before that. But even before that, my I worked in nonprofits
Right.
for 14 years before I
Right.
went back for my PhD. And I often found myself in training roles,
Hmm.
doing adult education, youth education,
Right.
even when I was barely out of the quote unquote youth category myself.
Yeah.
I think I was 25 teaching 12 to 24-year olds.
Right.
Right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
Well, and I was just, one of the things that I'm conscious of having stayed in the activist game this as long as I have is the difference in, the numbers of young people coming out today, the difference in
mhm,
and you're in that that collegiate setting. So you've been, and don't, because people keep telling me, well, there's just so many of you. And I'm like, yes, and we're multiplying.
Quickly.
we used to march. 10% is not enough. Recruit, recruit, recruit. We've done our jobs. Now it's 25%, or everybody's gay. um, yeah, that's the gay agenda. So,
Well,
but
it's interesting though.
so tell me what you're seeing. Tell me the differences you've seen. Tell me all anything you want to tell me, really. But
Well, I think too is that in some ways it feels like we're multiplying, right?
mhm,
But I think part of what that means is actually our language is getting more inclusive
mhm.
and we are recognizing the nuances such that more people can recognize themselves, right? So when that chant 10% is not enough, recruit, recruit, recruit was out, people didn't talk about asexuality as being part of an alternative understanding,
No, that 10% was the Kinsey scale, right? So the
right?
Kinsey scale was 10% of people on the planet are homosexuals. That was like
Exactly.
a very scientific
Exactly.
scale. Homosexuals. That's that was,
So
and like, yeah,
that's another hierarchical binary that we
right,
function in, right?
right.
That
You're
there's
either
just
straight or you're
you're
not, or you're
straight
gay,
or you're gay, and
right,
that's it. We were barely getting to the place where people were comfortable with the idea of bisexuality.
right.
And, now we're talking about more and different and coming up with our own in a different way.
Yeah.
So I do think some of that increase in numbers, frankly, is that the work of queer theory, really. Queer theory is not just about like LGBTQ and two spirit experience, although that is a big part of it. And those histories that have been previously erased and or forgotten are being unearthed and analyzed and thought about and talked about. That's only a portion of queer theory. The other part of queer theory is looking at what do we call normal and why do we call it normal and how does it shift over time. So that idea of the numbers have expanded, I think is really the benefit of people who've been doing queer theory, and in particular queer of color critique, to think about what does it mean when you say that you're queer, and what does it mean when you say that you're straight but you have intimate relationships across gender identity, but you're sexing with someone who people read as the same gender, or you have bro sex, right? Um, what do those things mean? And I think that's a testimony to the fact that more of us are engaging in queer theory than we like to own. I think there's also kind of a pushback, right? Like you were saying earlier, you um, like yeah, in some ways you identify more as lesbian now, but recognizing that in the past you identified as dyke, that's very like working class of a particular socio-historical moment or a moment in society that happened in the past, that language is very, very specific. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm,
it's just like studs and aggressives is very specific in terms of time, age, uh, race, and class.
mhm,
So even just the way we are thinking about queerness
mhm,
is being expanded,
mhm.
right? People are now talking about Two Spirit differently and recognizing that that is a broad category that looks different according to tribal nation that's associated with it. And there can be any number of gendered roles that people play in their communities, right? But that umbrella, Two Spirit, can speak to a number of those things, not all, but a number. And so we need to recognize how that plays out as queerness socially. if that makes sense.
It
It's
makes
that Gemini
absolute
thing.
it makes absolute sense.
Like I go off on a thing and then I step back and I'm
Wait,
like,
what
did
did I
that make
say?
sense to anybody else but me?
I think it did. I was looking at the clock to see how long into the interview queer theory came up, but
3 seconds in. I'm doing good.
Yeah, you are doing good.
I
So
hope.
language. So one of the conversations can't remember when you and I had this conversation, and I had it with Bubba and Sugar the other day. In fact, Bubba and Sugar and I were just talking about the younger generation and whether they do identify as, either Butch Dyke, Stead.
Mhm.
Like, do they? We don't know. We're not talking to them. We don't know. But because that for us is a very specific. It's a very specific denotation, or right?
Mhm.
Is that the right
Mhm.
word? I mean, it denotes a
Yeah.
period, right? And it denotes a language and an affect, even.
Yes.
And that's right. Yeah, yeah. And
It
some of
abs.
that is
Yeah.
indescribable, or I think I said it in the blog of Bubble and Sugar that I tried to describe femme. I used I'm like, how do you give a definition of femme? Like, you can't. And the femme that I'm talking about was very queer centric. And nowadays,
Mhm.
young women identify themselves as femme, and they're
Mhm.
not. That doesn't mean gay or
Mhm.
queer. And in my world, when that first happened, I was like, you can't
What
take
do we
that
do?
word. You can't take that word. That word means queer person, femme, right? And
Mhm.
there's some, I just interviewed a younger person who is a young queer femme who is a
Mhm.
queer femme and says that word does mean queer femme now. So
Mhm.
it's confusing to me. But I tried to give a definition of femme just in the sense of being someone who does gender in terms of the feminine perspective,
Mhm.
and is comfortable doing the over the top, a high femme being that comfortable with that over the topness.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
I just said, and the rest of it's too nuanced for me even trying to explain to you because are you kidding me? Like I can't. I don't know why especially when I was 20 years old, but it can still happen.
Mhm.
I meet a high femme and I can blush within like seconds. Like I don't, I mean, especially in my 20s and 30s, I mean, my early 20s when I first came out, the first femmes I ever met didn't know me other than having a red face. And I've seen
Mhm.
other young butches like that. And it's like this
Mhm.
just ness that
Like,
happens.
what do I do?
Right. What do I do with that? It's just such a funny, but for me,
Mhm.
it's so delightful. But I don't even think that any of those nuances or that kind of butch femme dance, like, I don't think that can be described or
Well, I
gotten in a way that people can
yeah.
get it. I don't know.
I think it can, but I think it's definitely something that people have to wrap their head around.
Right.
Because I see 20 and 30 something cisgender straight men when they engage someone that I recognize as someone who has and still to a certain degree identifies as femme. Um, I see them have that response to someone that I ID recognize feminist in. And I
Mhm.
think part of the key is femme is about, you're right, that high femme, that to the nth possible degree of identification with femininity,
With no
but
apology.
with no
With
apology.
no apology. And that's one of the things I love about femmes and high femmes is like I'm doing my feminine and I'm doing it over the top. And that doesn't mean I get to be sexualized by you. And that's not an invitation for you to
Mhm.
wolf whistle me or be an ass.
Yeah,
But even though that's what you
because you
think,
might get punched,
right. This
you
is not
know,
about you. This is about, right.
me,
Right. And
my
that's what I love
appreciation
about
of
femmes is
me.
my appreciation of yes, yes, yes,
And
yes.
I think there is a queerness to that though too. And I mean queerness
Oh no.
in the sociological understanding of gender sense, right?
I get
And
that.
I think so if you recognize that there are these gender scripts that we are given socially about what it means to look, be, operate as a man or a woman. And the ways that that is set up is oppositionally,
Right.
because that's in the binary and
Right.
that's part of the hierarchy.
Which in the show I talk about being classically trained female.
Exactly.
Right.
And that is the classical training, right? But part of what that training says is you can have pride and be happy about being a woman and know that your role as a woman is to be subservient to men. Anyone who identifies as man, you're subservient to. And the system is set up that you're always the opposite. So if men are understood as strong, domineering, in control, sometimes violent when they quote unquote need to be, and the thinkers, movers, and shakers, then woman is the opposite. Woman is weak, can't make up their mind, emotional and caring and nurturing, and can't be trusted with these things. What turns, I think, femme identity outside of being classical training is like, oh no, I appreciate the pretty things. I love that I'm nurturing and caring. And I will punch you in the face if you grab my, can I say this here? If you grab my ass, you will be
Yes,
cursed
you can
out and
say anything
punched.
you want. You can say
You
anything you
will
want.
get hurt.
you, you will be hurt. That is a
Yeah,
fact. Absolutely, you
right.
will be hurt.
I'm
Yes.
not calling my
Yes. You're
brother.
not.
I'm not calling my
No.
male friend.
Mm-mm. No.
I'm going to do this.
I'm gonna do that. Yeah. No, I can. I same. And there's at least that air about it, right?
Hmm.
That there's
Yeah.
yes. And I have always somehow very much appreciated
Yeah.
that.
So
Yeah.
it's a very excuse the language, kind of fierce in your face, I will whoop your ass
Mm-hmm.
kind of femininity
Mm-hmm.
that is very queer. It goes against everything we're told women should be, but
Yeah.
it looks like traditional classic femininity,
Right.
you
This is
know?
exactly why I wanted you to come on the gender reveal party.
Well, and
I
it's,
love that.
you know what I mean? And people will say, like, oh, she can't be femme because she doesn't wear lipstick or she doesn't do heels. That's not what it's about. It's about that, like, whatever way I do woman, I'm loving it. And I will lift weights, or that's a big box of girly shoes. And yes, it's heavy. I'll carry it. Don't, you ain't got to deal with it. I will carry it. Like those kinds of things. And it doesn't mean you don't appreciate sort of some of those um, typically identified masculine things. You just appreciate that gender can be played with, and you can pull the good and play with that and present that and express that in different ways.
Right.
I think that's where
Well,
that's where
and
the
really,
queerness.
the butch femme dance is inside of that because as a butch, like, there's nothing more fun than the over masculinization of playing that role and having that woman on your arm. And when you have a high femme on your arm, I mean, it's hard not to feel like $1 million,
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
and this is where we get into that weirdness, right? Because like there's stuff that uh here's an experience, right? So Jessica and I, this is actual happened in Washington, D.C., right? Went to the Janet Jackson concert. Man, that was awesome.
Mhm.
Do you remember that?
I didn't
Did you
go, but I
go?
heard it
Oh
was
my
fantastic.
God. It was amazing. Went to the Janet Jackson concert. Now, here's the thing. At the time, remember, I'm transitioning, so I
Hmm.
look like I'm 18. I'm
Hmm.
35 or 36 or something. But
Hmm.
I look like I'm 18 because I just
Hmm.
got peach fuzz on, right? And
Hmm.
she, Jessica, she's smoking.
Fantastic,
She's
like
like,
smoke and
right,
film.
smoking femme, right? And so we're walking across the street after the concert, and she kind of has my hand back here, like this. I'm
Hmm.
behind her, and a truckload of men, and I mean an entire truckload of men, are like, is that your girl? And I'm just like, and I just looked at him, and of course they all give me all these props, right? Well, it's hard not to like then. Those are the exact kind of experiences that feed a man's ego, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That then I can be conscious of, but I assert that 18 years of soaking my brain in testosterone started to have me actually think, like, almost become that. You know what I mean? Which
Hmm.
is part of the reason for me to go off testosterone was like, I don't, I am woman. What happened? I'm woman identified. shit, I forgot. Like, that's how it occurred almost. Like the Me Too movement happened. It was like, I have a Me Too story. Oh, fuck. Oh, shit. Like it was weird. But long story short, there's that whole thing where for us, we're doing butch femme,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're doing queer.
Mm-hmm.
So us, it's smoking hot. They're doing the binary. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
wolf whistling. They're applauding the
Mm-hmm.
binary, which I'm supposed to be disgusted by.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Because the binary, and this is the thing, right? The binary, in many ways, the binary does not support butch identity, but it also does support butch identity,
Right.
right?
Right.
That's that whole like the thing that you protest and resist. Sometimes,
Persists.
depending on how you protest it, you're actually supporting it,
Right. Sure. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's those kind of situations that always have to be, those are the nuance kind of
Yeah.
things that are, ah. So anyway, it's interesting.
There's
It's
a
part of also what's interesting about having lived in what I say as an undercover white guy. Um, well, the vagina is always there. I
yeah.
mean, and let's face it, being a perceived man with a vagina is funny because men talk about their junk all the time, all the time, right? Come on,
Mhm.
they do. So anyway, you got to see the show. Did you see the show?
I did. I saw it a long while ago, so my memory isn't always so great. So there are probably details that are very, very fuzzy.
Do you remember like, yo, I like that part, or I hated that part? Oh no, don't tell you
I mean,
that. There's some of that in there.
I will say, like, part of it for me is that, um, it's one thing watching the show, if you are someone who sort of has no connection with the individual, right? You have connection with the story and the idea. And it's a different thing. Well, I'm going to tear up. It's a different thing
Me too.
when it's someone you know and care about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the things that stand out for me and my favorite parts are just, I experience you as such a wonderful, open person that I remember just being so happy, like, oh my God, like you are putting it out there for the world. And you are like, world, just take this gift and learn from it, work with it, go with it.
Yeah.
And there's some really
Thanks.
hard truths in there.
Yeah.
So everything that feels like the thing that makes you want to cry is my favorite part, right?
Yeah.
Um, because you're speaking truth, like that phrase, speak truth to power, isn't about like I'm cranky and yelling and pissed off at everybody all the time. What the way I read it is that we are told so much by these hierarchical systems to keep the truths of our lived reality hidden.
Yeah.
It is powerful to bring it to the light of day.
Yeah.
And not because someone told you you had to, or your parents found you, or this, that, or the other, but because you want to.
Yeah.
So I tell my students all the time, like, we're talking about really important, intimate stuff. You can share with me whatever you want. And they don't understand always. When I say it is really hard to shock me, they just see me
They
as
don't
like
know.
the nice teacher with cute shoes and lipstick
They
and
don't know.
perfume.
Right. They didn't
They,
see you when you were in your
in
That's
some
so
ways, I
funny.
invented dancing on the speaker
Right.
in the 2000s, right? And I was bigger than I was now, and I was like Lizzo, girl, I helped train you in that. Come to mama, let's
See,
talk.
you're the second one of my friends that said that.
But it's true. I'm
It
like,
is true.
I mean,
Well,
just an
especially in the sense
aside,
that you paved the way for that. And that's one
yeah,
of the things yeah,
just as an
100%.
aside, there was this story that I saw about Lizzo wearing a purple fishnet dress with pasties and underwear to Cardi B's birthday party, and
Sorry.
people and had this cute little like hair thing going on,
I'm
and the
laughing
nails
because I'm
were
like,
of
didn't
course
you
long.
invent that?
like, and they were like, oh my God, this is so revolutionary. And I'm like, I was wearing that in about, I think it was 2002. Mine was bronze. I got it from Ashley Stewart on sale. And I was wearing that to the club.
Right.
Like,
So I was like, I'm pretty sure I saw you in that out at the club.
so, um, but my students don't know that. They haven't seen pictures. We didn't take
Right.
as many pictures then. I'm so
No, thank
glad.
God for. Well, can you imagine if Facebook was alive when we were?
I'd
Yeah.
be in so much trouble.
Oh,
But now I can say, you
I'm
don't
already
have proof.
unhireable, but good Lord.
I'm like, there are no pictures, there's no proof.
Right.
What? But, I tell my students, you can tell me anything. Like, I'm not going to be shocked by it. But I also tell them, you don't have to.
Right.
Because so many times our culture and our society says, you have to tell me your gender and I have to be able to read it easily. And it's not about the individual, it's about the person who's saying it. It's their way of holding people accountable for being legible in the hierarchy. Well, you don't have to be legible to anybody but you.
Right.
So I purposely talk with my students and build my classes where, yes, we have to do assessments. Yes, you're probably going to have to write a paper, but I'm not requiring that you tell me all of your story because that takes your power away from you.
Yeah.
What I love about the gender reveal party is that when the time was right for you, when it sat, as my people say, when it sat right in your soul, when it was time, that's when you said, all right, I'm ready. And being a Gemini who loves the arts, you're like, and I'm going to put it in the way that makes sense for me. Like,
It
those
was.
are the beautiful moments.
Thank you. It's so interesting because I know it's not. I'm not an actor and I'm not a stand-up comedian, and I have done those things, but only when I was younger. And I've done, I did stand up a couple different
Mhm.
times at True Spirit, and I always
Yeah.
had to have stand-up bits to do. But I'm telling you, when I went off testosterone, it was like a download. It would not
Mhm.
stop. It's still not stopping. I'm going to be doing some other just short bits on the. It's another reason I'm doing this, having this website. It gives me a place to put that stuff. Um, but
Oh.
what I'm really excited about and a part of it is being 55, I think, but I'm at a place in my life where I know that it's not perfect. Like
Mhm.
there's more that I could fine tune and tweak and do
Mhm.
better and write better and be more consistent. And,
Mhm.
and maybe I will someday. I don't know. You know what I mean? I can if I
Yeah.
want. I
Yeah.
can if I want. And that doesn't stop me from wanting to just hang it up there
Mhm.
because when I did do it, I felt like it was important enough to do that I did
Yes.
it. I employed the help to get it done. And then the
Mhm.
response that I had when people see it is big. Like
Yeah.
it shifts people, it moves people. I had a woman who was 72 years old and saw it
Mhm.
and saw me a week later and said, this
Mhm.
entire week, I've seen how everything is gendered in our lives. And I've never seen that before in my life.
Wow.
Right? I was like, I can
Mhm.
die. I mean, I did.
My work is done.
My work is done. But seriously, it really was that kind of thing. So it feels good to just go, here you go. It's not perfect.
Yeah,
It's
there you
flawed.
go.
And I don't like how I look physically. Like I really,
None of
I
us
mean,
do.
no, but seriously, like I feel like I have
Yeah.
the caved in the belly, and I'm not a fan of that look for myself. And I'm just not. But I still just feel like, man, hang it up there. Let's see what happens,
Yeah.
and let people learn from it and enjoy it or not or whatever. So,
Well,
thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad you got a chance to watch it. It feels good to have my friends see it,
mhm.
because it's too hard to. It's just I don't know. It's just a big piece of my art that's really important. Feels good to me
Yeah.
to share.
Yeah.
It's also
Y-
way to process a lot of that stuff too. So.
Yeah. Well, you've always been an artist, I think, as long as I've known you. And I've always experienced you as a storyteller.
Yeah.
And this is a good time for people who are of communities where voices have been silenced and things have been erased. It's a good time for us to be telling and listening and visiting our own and other stories. And, a lot of my academic writing, I employ ethnography and what's called autoethnography, which is essentially a combination of autobiography, writing about the self and your experience, and ethnography, which is thinking about culture and society and the meanings that are created by culture and society.
Right.
So when you're doing autoethnography, you're combining your story, your lived experience of culture and society, and thinking about what those meanings have for you. So
Cool.
I really do see the gender reveal party as a piece of performance art that it's also auto ethnographic,
Yeah.
and um and just sort of it delves into those things. It delves into the whys and what that looks like. And we share um a, a friend who killed himself in Griffey. And there are so many stories that during the time, because I'll just put it out there, Griffey and I dated for a while, and it ended amicably. He's one of the few people I was able to, be in an intimate relationship with, both as a partner and sexing, and was able to then have a friendship with after.
Yeah.
Not because I'm evil, not because I'm the horrible ex-girlfriend, but just personality wise with other people, it didn't work out.
Sometimes you don't want to be friends with your exes.
Sometimes it took a long time.
Sometimes.
I'm a Gemini with at least decent sized ego. So there were
Mhm.
times I was like, but that's true. But why would you not want to be friends with me?
Right. Of course.
You know, I've grown. I understand for some people it just doesn't work. Okay,
Yeah. For
that's
some people,
cool.
I'm over the top.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, but with Griffey, that wasn't the case. And we weren't in touch all the time, but I thought that he knew that he could reach out to me with whatever was going on. And there were things going on that he didn't for whatever reason. And I often think if Griffey had a lot of things going on. If Griffey had felt like he had the option to tell his story in this way, I wonder if that would have helped. I
Might
don't
have.
know. That's the thing with suicide.
We don't know.
The people left behind never know. Even if there's a note, he left a note. But even so, there are questions, right?
Yeah.
Um, and while
A
it
lot of
hurt,
questions.
yeah, and while it hurt and it was painful, I just trust that he did what he felt was best for him at the time, even if I disagree,
Same.
right? And
I've forgiven him.
yeah,
But it took me a minute. It's one of
it,
those
it
things I
takes a
was just,
minute.
it's weird because I was just talking to my massage therapist about this morning.
Hmm.
Because it's a long story, but anyway, because I'm good at forgiveness. I'm pretty good at it. Like I have a
Hmm.
muscle and I teach forgiveness and it's part of my
Hmm.
practice and it's part of my,
Hmm.
my
Yeah.
whole methodology.
Hmm.
Because I have a pretty big muscle in forgiveness. And so
Yeah.
I was kind of shocked with myself at how much I held on to the
Yeah.
unforgiveness. Like I was
Yeah.
been really pissed at him, like
Hmm.
pissed. And then there was this weird day, and when I was headed to the airport to go to a client, like I was going to go, I was going to give a keynote, and
Okay.
and it was I was so excited because I was going to go deliver this keynote to 1,100 women, and I was like at a place where it's like I'm arrived,
Hmm.
like telling some that was one of my goals at some point, right? So at that point, I was like,
Hmm.
I'm here, I'm doing it, I'm on my way to the airport.
Yeah.
And there's this place in when you drive to the Kansas City airport that you leave Kansas and you get to go into Missouri.
Hmm.
You know that Griffey was from Missouri, and I'm from
Yeah.
Kansas, and there's a big rift between Kansas and Missouri that goes back to the free state, slave state,
Years.
right?
Yes.
Right, goes all the way
Decade.
back. So we don't say Missouri, we say Misery. So he's from Misery, if you ask me. Um, so there's always this time where I cross into Kansas and go into
Hmm.
Missouri, and every single time I'm there, I think of him.
Yeah.
So I happen to be So I go and I think of him, and there, and right in the moment when I see that, there's this gorgeous sunrise because I'm
Mm,
going in the morning to get on the plane. The
mhm,
sunrise comes up, and I just had this overwhelming like, oh, and I'm like, okay, I forgive you. Like
yeah,
I release it. I'm done. I love you. I forgive you. I've always loved you.
yeah,
I know he knows I always loved him, and I knew that he could
mhm,
let me be pissed at him because he's already dead and he doesn't care. So
mhm, mhm,
like I just know this. So
yeah,
anyway, so I was like, okay, fine. Like I love you, and
mhm,
I released. I felt this great, like, ah,
mhm,
I forgive you. I got
yeah,
to the airport, checked in through security, sat down, opened my phone, and his picture was right there,
wow.
and it was
So
his
he heard you.
and it was his birthday.
Yeah,
And I had forgotten that it was July
yeah,
12th. And
mhm,
there he was, and I was like, Jesus Christ.
yeah. Well, and I think part
Seriously.
of it, like Griffey knew the the expansiveness of his gender very young and was in a small town. Like, yes, he was in Missouri, but it wasn't Kansas City, Missouri. It was a small town in Missouri. And he took whatever amount of joy he had, at least in the time that we were together, he took that joy into working with other LGBTQ youth. And he was very clear. He was like, yeah, I'm from a small town. I don't know a whole bunch of things about much, but I'm willing to learn and I'm willing to expand myself and my perspective to do so. And, I think for that reason, among many others, like the question of like, how do you think about it or address it, or it being gender, sexuality, the interplay between the two, how they function in their own, how they get to know their own. Like when I think about those questions, I frequently go back to that time, in my knowing Griffey, right? And some of that was just in his 20s, some of that lived on into his 30s, right? Um, and I do think he might have thrived with our expanding notions of gender, our expanding notions of masculinity, and how that plays out,
Agree.
you know?
It's a safer world, a little bit, this much.
Yeah, a little
This much.
bit.
Yeah.
We'll
Because
take
I
every
know the
little bit and
hypervigilant.
ask for more.
Yeah. 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 So, my friend, we're wrapping up. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience before we go? Anything you
Hmm.
want to say to? I mostly
I
attract white cis adults over 50. So,
Okay. That's good to know, actually. The alphabet soup is nothing to be afraid of.
Mm,
And I tell my students this all the time.
mhm,
Misgendering is a violent act,
mm.
and don't let yourself get in the way of doing better. So if someone says, that's not who I am, your flustering around it is yours, not theirs. Say, I'm sorry, get it right,
Move
move
on.
along,
Right.
and take it as an investment in their belief that you can do better. Even if they're angry, even if they're pissed off, don't tone police, but just accept it as a gift, right? Because if they didn't think you would do better, they would ignore you and walk away.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's simple.
That's a good advice. I talk about that all the time, how hard it is for me to, when people start falling all over themselves because they
Yeah,
misgender me,
yeah.
it's like, just move on, move on, move
Just,
on.
yeah, I told
And you can
you
say you're
it.
sorry. I don't care. I got it. Just move on. Just stop with the
Well, and I'm like, the way to show you're sorry is to be like, yeah, my bad. Okay.
move on.
And I'm on it.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
I think that's the big thing. Like it's fluid, take it as a gift and just move on along. You don't need to know why. You don't, you know, and frankly, if you have a question, there is a polite way to ask.
And they can send it to me. right? They
Yeah.
can ask questions here. They can always come to the gender reveal party to learn new things,
Yeah.
and that's why we're teaching them.
Yeah.
That's why we're here to talk about stuff. So
It's true.
that's it for sure.
There's nobody was ever offended by how would you like me to refer to you?
Right? It's easy.
Yeah.
Pretty easy question. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
all the
And the they them
emotion.
pronouns is, I tell people this all the time. Neuroprogramming is a muscle that we flex, but you have a cortical map up here that can learn anything, and it can learn to use they them pronouns. It just have to flex a muscle. So practice. If you
Yeah.
want to do it, practice.
Yeah.
Don't keep coming to me and saying I just can't do it, Jay.
Oh,
It's
yes,
like
you can.
you
Oh,
can if
yes,
you
you
want to
can.
practice. You can. You
Mhm.
can.
And it
So
is grammatically correct.
that's right. And we got
Leave
the
that
grammar
alone
dialed
too.
in. We'll let that go. I let that get me for a minute. But that's just silly. It's ridiculous. So, all right, my friend. Well, I love you. I appreciate you, and I'm so grateful to have had you on the gender reveal party.
My pleasure.
We've
Thank you
shared a
for
lot of
having me. This has been fun.
absolutely. It has been fun. It's nice to see you.